Hi, my name is Jerry. In this short session, I'm going to introduce you to Linux Ubuntu on a virtual machine. I'm using VM Workstation. So, what I want to show you is how to install Ubuntu. I'm going to have a quick look at the Ubuntu interface. I'm going to explain the directory structure, and then I'm going to introduce some of the core utilities for directory and file manipulation. Okay, so what I started off doing is I've got VM Workstation installed. What I did was I did a quick search for an Ubuntu OVA, and I found one here on Ubuntu.com. So all you need to do is go to this website and download Ubuntu Desktop for the platform that you're on. So I've downloaded the OVA, I've saved it somewhere safe, I open up VM Workstation. In VM Workstation, I'm going to create a new virtual machine. So I point that at the OVA and then I fill in the details. So a wizard starts up. The important thing to remember here is the username and password that you decide on. If you forget your username and password, you just have to reload it again. The installation will take some time, so pause the video here and wait until you get until your Ubuntu is installed, and then you can pick up where you left off. So this is the flash screen. This is where all the Ubuntu files are loaded. There is some processing to continue on with, but you should see a desktop when you get to that. When everything is installed, I started off by right-clicking on the desktop, so you can change your backgrounds. Hover over the icons. A dock will appear on the left of your screen. Have a look at each of these icons, see what they do, have a play with them. There is a files icon which is up here, and there's a home icon on the bottom right of your screen. Have a look at those. What I did as an exercise was I opened up the home icons. I went to Documents, right-click, create a new folder called My Files. We'll be able to play with these in the terminal, but we'll do that later on again. So there's two ways to do everything, really. Ubuntu is becoming much more GUI. In the old days, we used the terminal for everything. So we'll have a look at the terminal to see what you can do. Right. There's a Show App application icon on the bottom left of the screen, and that will take you to a software updater. It's a good plan to check that all of your Ubuntu is up to date. So that will do it fairly automatically. We will see how to do it in the terminal later. In previous versions of Ubuntu or Linux, you got a default American keyboard, but when you were installing the Ubuntu, it should have asked you what your keyboard is. But if you haven't, there's a settings option in the show apps that will let you change your keyboard layout. I'm using a UK layout. The App Center is on the docking station as well. You can install applications, you can install browsers. For practice, I installed Visual Studio Code. That works quite well. In the Manage Apps, there's an update all version. Sometimes this hangs from me, but we'll show you how to do it in the terminal later on. So there's an easier way to do it. Right. In order to play with the terminal, in my version, terminal wasn't pinned to the dock. So what I did was I searched for a terminal and I pinned it on the dock by right-clicking on it. There's a keyboard shortcut, Control Alt and T will open the default terminal. So we're going to be playing with the terminal in a minute. So we'll do that. I've also opened up Firefox. You can install other browsers if you're more comfortable with those. I'm using the default Firefox. And I've done a quick search for terminal in Ubuntu. And that brought me to a useful tutorial, which I'll show you in a minute. Before we go any further, I want to talk briefly about security in virtual machines. Remember that you're attached to the internet, so you have to be careful about security. The least you can do is update your software and keep your software updated. That will give you the most secure versions. The sudo apt update and sudo apt upgrade, we will look at those in terminal in a little while. Remember your privilege management. So you will create a standard administrative user using the sudo privileges. We will talk about sudo in a little while. You could think about looking at your firewall. So there's an option in the App Center to install the firewall and configure it. I'm not going to go into that in this short tutorial. Right. The tutorial I found is there. There's the URL. I would recommend that you pause this video at the minute and go through the tutorial so you have you get a chance to play with the terminal. Some of the highlights of the tutorial are there, and we will talk about these commands in this short tutorial. Well, what I did here was I opened up the terminal, I pulled it to one side, I opened up the browser so that I've got the terminal on one side and the browser on the other to work through the tutorial, which gives you a chance to play with the terminal. And if you, I'm the sort of learner that learns by doing things. I recommend that you try all of these things as you go. So, a quick look at the default directory system that Ubuntu installs when it installs itself. There's a root directory. The binaries contain the core utilities, which we will be playing with at the minute. You will have access to those from the terminal. There's an sbin, which has the admin commands. The etc or etc directory contains the configuration files. Later on in your Ubuntu journey, you may change configurations, but I'm just playing with the default versions at the minute. The boot directory contains the kernel and the grub. And the grub becomes important if you've got a dual boot system. So you could, in theory, install Ubuntu on top of a Windows file and choose which at boot time. Dev contains the device files. Home is the one we will be playing with most in this tutorial. The home directory, we will see how to access and use the core utilities from the home directory. The user directory is where your applications are installed. Right, so at this stage, I recommend opening up the terminal. And the first command I'm going to look at is pwd. That shows the present working directory. I, in a very imaginative fashion, use the username Jerry, so that's my home directory. Type clear will clear the terminal at the console. Now, it's important to remember at this stage that case matters. So if you type pwd in capitals or clear with the capital C, you will see that these will not access the commands. So when you're looking at the commands, the case is important and spaces are important. Changing directory, we looked at this a couple of slides ago. cd cedilla will take you to the home directory, but you find in current versions that cd will just do that on its own. cd space and 2 dots will take you up a level to the parent directory. cd space dash dot dot forward slash dot dot will take you up 2 levels, and cd space minus will take you to the previous directory. So the spaces are important, and there's a screen print of me playing with the cd command, so I can change direction or I can change directories depending on where you want to go. I recommend that you try those. So pause the video and have a play with the change directory command. Right. The next thing I'm going to look at is list files. So this is the equivalent of the dir file in MS-DOS. It will list the files and directories that you can access in the current directory. You can point the ls at different directories if you want to see what's in different directories. What I'm showing you there is man.ls. That is the manual command. So it's a kind of a help file, and it's easy to read and use. Now, in previous versions of man, when you type man, it would speed up across the screen. So this version I'm using has a H for help and Q for quit. Q for quit will take you back to the command line, and H for help will take you into the less commands, which I'll show you on the next screen. ls space dash dash help will show you a shorter version of help, which you might find useful. Here's a question for you. What does ls dash space dash or do? And the answer to that is it will show you, it will display display the directories and files in reverse order, either in text or number order, reverse. So if we press H from the ls command, from the man command, we will see the less options, and this shows you how to navigate through files. But I'm finding in this version that it does the less stuff automatically. It doesn't speed through. So that might be useful to know if you have a version that doesn't let you navigate, and Q will exit. Okay, so the first thing I want to look at is the list filed options. And the one I find most useful is ls-l. That shows you the long version of list. So if you just do an ls, it will show you the files and directories in a line. This will show you the files and directories in more detail. So the current version of my home directory has no files in it yet. It's got a number of directories. I know they're directories because if you look at the lines that are shown, they start with a D. So D means it's a directory. If you've got a dash there, it means it's a file. Notice that the ls.l shows a total of 36 files and directories, but it's not showing 36, so there are hidden files there that we can access. If you go into man, it'll show you how to access the hidden stuff, but I'm not going to play with that yet. So if I look at the lines on the ls long form, the line starting with D shows you directory or file. Then the next 9 characters show you the permissions on each file or directory. And the permissions are grouped into groups of 3: owner, group, and other. Each group has 3 different permissions, and we'll talk about those on the next slide. So you've got owner group, you've got size in bytes 4096, which seems to be the standard. The date modified, that tells you when I installed my Ubuntu, and the file name is desktop documents. So those showing the names. What does ls-lr do? That's showing you that you can, after the dash, you can have more than one option. So that's list files in long form in reverse. So if you go to the man ls, it will show you the options. Try ls-lh, and that will show you in human readable form, so the 4096 becomes easier for humans to read. Right. I'm going to talk briefly about file types and permissions. So we've talked about the D and the dash. That's either a directory or a file. The next 3 letters are the user permissions, and they can be read, write, or execute. The next 3 are the groups read, write, or execute, and the next 3 are others read, write, execute. So if I look at my ls in long form, I can see that the default for this version of Ubuntu gives me those permissions. We can change them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at chmod, which will change permissions on your files. In order to do that, I'm going to make a directory called change permissions. And you can see on the printout there, make directory space change permissions creates a directory. CD will change the focus into the change directory permissions. The touch command will create empty files. So touch first.txt and second.sh will create two empty files. On the next line, I'm using the echo command. Echo will display input on the current output, on the default output, which is the screen. But in this command, I'm redirecting the output to a file called third.txt. We will talk about echo and touch in later slides. So all I'm doing here is I'm creating three files, and the next line, ls, shows me that I've created three text files in the current directory. ls.l is showing me the default permissions when I create files in this directory. So you can see there that I've got read and write for the owner and the group and write for the others. Yeah. Now, what I'm going to do on the bottom half of the printer of the screen is I'm going to use chmod, and that command, if I've got permission to do it, u plus x will add the exec permission to the user group on first.txt. On the next line, I'm using g minus w. That will remove the right permission to the group on second.sh. Then in the next line, I'm using u is equal to rwx, g is equal to rx, o is equal to w. And that's just showing you can use the equal to sign to set all of the permissions in all of the groups in one line. And then when I do ls-l, you can see the display that each of these changes have been made. Notice how first.txt and third.txt are now displaying in green, because this version of Ubuntu shows that executable files were displayed in green. So that's just a display. The last thing I want to show you on this slide is the A switch. chmod A plus X second.sh will add the executable permission to all of the groups on the second.sh file. And when I display it on the bottom, you can see that change has been made. Right. Another way to change permissions is to use the octal number system. We've used hexadecimal to convert binary to hexadecimal. You split your binary numbers into groups of 4. To convert your binary numbers into octal, you split your binary numbers into groups of 3. This is quite useful for changing permissions. So in the diagram on the center of the slide where I've got user group and other, I've split my RWXs into groups of 3. And can you see that reading from right to left, that each group of 3 is equal to 1, 2, or 4 in octal. So I can use that to give my 9 digits a value. So the example here is chmod 777 first.txt adds all of the permissions to all of the groups for that file first.txt. In the next example, 644, can you see that the user group has a 4 and a 2, which is equal to 6, so that's RW. The group has a 4, which is just R, and O is a 4, it's just R. So when I do chmod 664 third.txt, I'm applying those permissions to those groups. And when I display them, I can see that those changes have taken effect. Right. Redirection uses the greater than sign, two greater than signs, or less than sign to change the output of a command from the default input or output somewhere else. So in this example, I'm echoing hello.txt and I'm adding it to a file called file.txt. You have to be careful with the single greater than sign, because if file.txt doesn't exist, it will be created. If it does exist, it will be overwritten, so be careful. The second line, I'm echoing more.txt and I'm using two greater than signs. This will add the text to the file.txt. So now I've got a second line. The cat command will display the contents of file.txt, and there on the screen you can see that hello and more.txt have now been added to file.txt. Another use for redirection is when I do the list files in long form, rather than displaying from the screen on the third line, I'm adding it to a file called listing.txt. This could be quite useful if you wanted to hold the contents of a command and process it later. And cat.listing.txt shows what would have been shown on the screen. It's been added to a file. When I look at the input, on the bottom line of my bullet points, I'm taking file.txt and I'm applying a sort command to it. But I'm using a -R to reverse the order of the sorting, and I'm redirecting the output into file2.txt. And when I display file2.txt, you can see that that's actually happened. Piping sends the output of one command to another. The example I'm showing there is man.ls, but that happens automatically at the minute. A grep command will search and display the lines that contain what's inside the inverted commas. So in this case, I'm doing a list file in long form, but I'm only showing the lines that contain .txt. So that's a kind of a filtering device. Right. Again, I recommend that you stop the video and that you go through each line and see what they do. When you've done that, I'm going to show you line by line. So cd space ... will change to the home directory. I'm making a directory called pipe.demo. I'm changing to pipe.demo. Touch a.txt, b.txt, c.log, d.txt will create 4 empty files. And then if I do a list files, I can see that the 4 files are in the current directory. In the next line, I'm going to list files, but I'm going to send the output to a new file called allfiles.txt. And then in the next line, I'm going to do the same thing again, and I'm going to add it a second time to allfiles.txt. If you did a cat allfiles.txt now, you would see that it's listed all files twice. The next line, ls pipe grep.txt, we saw that on the previous slide. So it's listing all the files that contain .txt. It's a filter. The next line, cat allfiles.txt pipe wc. Right. I've deliberately put in a command that I haven't introduced you to yet. If you did a man space wc, it would show you that this is a word count and there are options that you can apply. The next line, ls pipe grep.txt to testfiles.txt. So that's putting together stuff we've seen earlier. We're listing the files, we're filtering for .txt, and we're sending the output to testfiles.txt. And then cat textfiles.txt displays the contents. It's probably a good time to pause the video and have a little play with the commands you've seen so far and the man files. Now, touch we've talked about earlier. Touch will create an empty file if it doesn't exist. If it does exist, it'll do nothing. Echo will display the text inside the inverted commas, and in this case, I'm redirecting the echo to text1.txt. So when I cat text1.txt, if I hadn't lost the screen display, it would show the text that I've added to it. Echo and cat, we've talked about those already. Echo displays what you type, and cat will display the contents of a file. Cat is short for concatenate. So in this case, I'm echoing hello world to the screen, and then I'm going to echo hello world to a file that I'm creating called hello.txt. Then I'm going to display hello.txt. And then in the next line, I echo, notice that I'm using single quotes and two greater than signs here. And I'm going to add that to hello.txt. And then I'm going to display it again. And then in the next line, I'm going to echo, I'm now adding text to a second file called text2.txt, which I'm creating. And then in the next line, I'm showing you that you can cat more than one file at a time. And in this case, I'm catting hello.txt and text2.txt, and I'm sending the output to text3.txt. So there's a lot of me talking there, but again, if you wanted to pause the video and play with the commands you've seen so far, now is a good time. Okay, for the next few exercises, I've created a random text file. What I've done is I've opened up a file text editor called Nano, and I've just added some random text to it so we have some text to play with. Right, grep we've seen already will search files and display files that meet the text pattern that you've input. We'll talk about regular expressions briefly. We'll man regular expressions in a minute, but grep supports regular expressions, recursion, color highlighting, and filtering. Regular expressions are quite useful because you will be using them in other scripting languages than Python. So it's just a common way of searching for text and displaying it. And there's an example of me grepping paragraph and random text. If you look at the previous file, you'll see that a lot of my lines contain the line paragraph just by luck. So I'm displaying all of the lines that contain that text paragraph. Regular expressions let you match patterns inside strings and files. When I go to the man grep, it explains what regular expressions are, but they're quite useful because you use them in lots of scripting languages. So it's a kind of a common way of matching patterns across different applications and scripting languages. And there's a simple grep example. Grep space dot capital E in inverted commas cat, and then that pipe command cats will show every line in random text that contains either cat or cats. So that's just a simple example, but regular expressions are quite useful and commonly used. Head and tail. There's a lot of stuff on that slide, so I've highlighted the commands I've used. Head.randomText is a utility that will show by default the first 10 lines. If you look at man.head, it'll show you the options that are available. And the next command I've used is head-15, so it's showing me the first 15 lines. There are lots of things you can change on the head command. And the tail.random shows the last 10 by default. But again, if you go tail.man, you can see what options are available. Su and sudo. Su switches to another user. In a multi-user system, you might want to do things as another user. If you use the Su and use a different username, it will ask for their password, and then you're acting as if you are them until you change back to yourself. Sudo is a super user. So in this example, I've tried to do app update, which I haven't got permission to do because I'm not a super user. So in the bottom half, if I do sudo app update, it will change me to a super user for the one command. And that's a kind of a security thing. So you can do super user things, but you have to use the sudo command every time just to remind you that you're a super user. But it's quite useful. We've talked about man. So there's man sudo. It's showing you the manual for sudo, the options that are available, and it's quite useful. And then again, you've got help or quit. The sort command is useful. To show this, what I've done is I've created a file called name.txt and I've added several names to it. If you know your folk music, you'll recognize these people. So I've added all these people and I've displayed them, and they display in the order that I've added them. Right. In the middle of the screen, what I've sorted name.txt, the default sort is an alphabetical sort starting on the first character. So when I display names.txt, it's put my people into order based on the first character. When I do a man.sort, I can see that other options are available. And one of the ones that sprang to mind is the next example. Sort space K2 names.txt. That will sort on the second field in the each line. So now I've got my people in surname order, which might be useful. Um, Earlier on, did a mistype and I typed names.tx. So I want to remove that file. And the command I use is rm remove space names.txt. You can remove directories, but in order to remove a directory, you have to empty it first, unless you force it. So the easy way is just go into the directory, remove all the files, and then go back out and remove the directory. Okay, that was a short introduction to Ubuntu. It's to get you up and running to install Ubuntu, to look at the interface, to have a quick play with the terminal, to access the help files and the manual files. But it's worth remembering that these things change. So if you're looking at this at some stage in the future, you might see different versions of Ubuntu. There's lots of help available out there, either from ubuntu.com or other sources. I hope you've enjoyed this video and you find it useful.